In 1896, there was a man by the name of Theodor Herzl who wrote a book called The Jewish State. It was translated to the English language, and when it was translated to the English language, it created extreme interest among English-speaking Christians for the Jews having a homeland. The book announced Zionism to the entire world, and it became the manifesto, listen carefully, to reestablish the nation of Israel. In 1896, this man predicted that Israel would be a nation in 50 years. Now add it up, 1897, I could switch my numbers, you know that. 7, 17, 27, 37, 47, 1947, end of World War II. You know what happened, don't you? It was fulfilled, it was finished in 1948, but the process was started in 47. Talk to me, somebody. Whew. He organized a movement called the Zionist movement that continued after his death. Now, this is one of the reasons, I want everybody to hear me, one of the reasons that Hitler believed a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world was in the process was because of the strength of the Zionist movement in Europe. Did you get that? And that's why he had this conspiracy theory against the Jews, because he didn't want the Jews to do that. Watch carefully what happens. The British link. This is a cool story. There was a man by the name of Dr. Guinness. He was a genius in prophecy who wrote that the time of the Gentiles, now listen to this, the time of the Gentiles would be over in Jerusalem in the year 1917. Now I'm going to read this to you. World War I broke out in 1914, and the British were moving into Palestine from Egypt to take over Palestine from the Turks who had it for 400 years. When World War I concluded, a Jewish chemist named Chaim Weizmann had assisted the British in developing a new system for providing acetone, a chemical needed to make ammunition. Now here's the story. The British were running out of ammunition, and they didn't have enough gunpowder. So this chemist went into a laboratory and invented a kind of a synthetic substance that could be put in gunpowder. So what it did, it kept the British Army active in fighting. If this, look at this, if this Jewish man had not done this, what I'm about to tell you would have never happened. Oh, come on, somebody shout yes. Yes. Okay, without it, the British would have lost the war. Following the war, Weizmann gained favor with the British government and convinced the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, to contact Lord Rothschild, a wealthy English financier, to help the Jewish settlements with a declaration known as, y'all know it, the Balfour Declaration. Now, can I read this to you? Sure, I'm going to do it anyway. Here it is. What am I asking you for? Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations which have been submitted and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national homeland for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done with any prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours truly, author James Balfour. So here's the point. Now this, everybody look at your neighbor and say, it gets intriguing. Oh, come on, say it loud. Say it gets intriguing. Now, follow the pattern. Follow the pattern. Turks have Jerusalem for 400 years. All of a sudden, it falls into the hands of British. They called it Palestine. Now, the British are Christians, and they have been reading a book by Guinness which says that the Gentiles are going to start losing control of Jerusalem in 1917. Now, don't miss it. In other words, the prophecy has been out there. The word has already been put in print, and thousands of British are believing they have a role to play. Come on. Now, you're going to get it in a minute. Come on. Because a man, popular preacher, in fact, here's why he was so popular. His family owned a brewery, and everybody drank their beer. He was the only one. He was a preacher of the gospel, and he was the only one that would go to parties and look at them and said, I'm not drinking your beer. I don't care if it is owned by the family. He had a real conviction in his heart. And I read that, and it cracked me up because he was really a very godly man. Now, watch this. So it's 1917. Touch your neighbor, say 1917. So it's 1917, and all of a sudden there's a general by the name of Edmund the Bull Allenby. And Edmund Allenby had decided he was going to take Jerusalem after 13 centuries of Islamic rule off and on. The Turks had taken Jerusalem in 1517. Now, here's where prophecy and belief in prophecy gets very important. There was an Islamic prophecy that the Turks had for centuries that said this. Now, let me tell you where it came from. It came from, well, I'll just quote it. There was a Muslim prophecy that was attributed to a 10th century poet, Ibn Kahashi, that, quote, the man who will conquer Jerusalem and redeem it from the infidel for all time to come will enter the city humbly on foot, and his name is God's prophet. All right. Let's go back. 900 years before what I'm about to tell you happened, a Muslim prophecy said two things. They know about this in Israel and even in the West Bank. Number one, the Turks would have Jerusalem until the waters would flow from the Nile River. The Turks got word that the British were laying pipe and running water from the Nile River into the desert. Now that shook them. They said, no, wait a minute. Don't we have a prediction that we will hold the city till that happens? Second thing is they have a prediction that a man will humbly come in on foot called God's prophet. And when you see God's prophet, he will liberate the whole area from all the infidels. Now, this is where the plot, look at your neighbor and say it gets thicker. Come on, look at your neighbor and say it gets thicker, gets thicker, gets thicker. You ready? The plot thickens. Here's what happens. John Hilton was a mechanic for the British Royal Flying Corps. He was in church on Sunday, June 1917. The minister spoke from the pulpit and predicted that Jerusalem would be liberated by the British using airplanes based on a prophecy of the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 31. That day in England, the preacher read this verse, and it's in Isaiah 31, 4 through 5. As a lion roars and a young lion over his prey, when a multitude of shepherds is summoned against him, he'll not be afraid of their voice, nor will be disturbed by their noise. So the Lord of hosts will come down and fight for Mount Zion and for its hill. Like birds flying about, so the Lord of hosts will defend Jerusalem. Defending also he will deliver it, and passing over, he will preserve it. Now, here's what the prophecy says, and this is how the British looked at this. A lion will, this deliverance is like with a lion. What is the emblem of England and Britain? Talk to me. A lion. Number two, the young lion was Allenby because he would be used for the process. This is how it was interpreted. The Mount Zion, of course, was the temple area, the walls of the old city that the Turks had rebuilt between 1517 to about 1535. That's the area it alludes to. Birds flying. This is where people could understand how will birds flying deliver, and how will passing over the city be delivered. After John Hilton, the mechanic for the Air Force, heard the preacher read this verse and predict that that Jerusalem would be liberated by the British by aeroplanes, Allenby was at the edge of Jerusalem, and he did not want bloodshed. He did not want bloodshed in the holy places. He did not want a war with the Turks in the city. So he contacts the British to say, how do you go into this city without bloodshed? They wired him back from London, Isaiah 35, 4 through 5, and said, you have to fly over it to deliver it. Now, this is 1917. This is in the very earliest days of airplanes. In fact, it wasn't called AIR, it was AEO, Aero. And in that day, Allenby had an idea. He made up leaflets printed where the Turks could understand the language. And he said to them, delivered Jerusalem to the hands of the British, and he signed it Allenby. Now here's the catch. When